The day my daughter Lisa slammed the front door in my face, something inside me broke. It wasn't my heart, though that had been slowly cracking for years with every harsh word and dismissive look. No, what shattered that evening was the final bit of hope I'd been holding on to. The belief that family meant anything to her beyond what I could give her financially. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. The phone call came out of the blue. Lisa, my daughter, hadn't been in touch for a while. She had always been the busy one, wrapped up in her career and her family, so it wasn't unusual for her to go days without calling. But something about her voice made my heart skip a beat. "Mom," she said, her tone tight and controlled. "I need to talk to you about something. Can you come over?" I had a sense something was off. Lisa and I had been through our ups and downs, but this felt different. She sounded like she was bracing herself for something. I agreed to come right away, trying not to let the anxiety creeping in take hold. Something was shifting, and I needed to understand what it was. When I arrived, I could tell right away that this wasn't just another chat about family finances or the kids' activities. She looked drained, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion. I had seen this look before in her early years, when she was juggling a full-time job and motherhood, always running on fumes, trying to be everything to everyone. But now, the weight of it seemed heavier. I took a seat on the couch, and we sat in silence for a long moment. "Mom," she started again, her voice wavering slightly. "I've been thinking a lot about how much you've done for us over the years. How much you've given. And I think we've all taken you for granted." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. My entire life, it seemed, had been devoted to my family. Helping Lisa and Daniel with their mortgage, taking care of the grandkids, offering my support whenever they needed it. It had become my role, my identity, and I never questioned it. I had convinced myself that giving without asking for anything in return was just what mothers did. But now, hearing her words, I realized how much I had buried my own desires. Lisa continued, her voice softer now. "I know we've relied on you, especially with the house, and I want to acknowledge that. I think it's time for us to figure things out on our own. I don't want you to feel like you have to keep doing this. It's not fair to you." My chest tightened. My initial instinct was to protest, to reassure her that I was fine, that helping them was what I wanted. But deep down, I knew something had shifted inside of me. I had spent so many years sacrificing my own life for theirs, and somewhere along the way, I had forgotten what it meant to live for myself. "You've always been there for us, Mom," Lisa continued, her voice cracking a little. "But I think you've put your own life on hold for too long. And I don't want that for you anymore." It was as though a switch had flipped in me. I had always assumed my role in their lives was to be the rock, the one who never asked for anything in return. But now, sitting in this room with Lisa, I realized that I had been putting off my own needs, my own desires, for so long that I didn't even know what they were anymore. "I don't know how to stop being there for you," I admitted, the words coming out heavier than I expected. "You're my family. I've always thought that's what I'm supposed to do, take care of you." Lisa looked at me with concern. "I know, Mom. But that can't be all there is. You deserve to think about what you need, too. You've given us so much. I want to make sure you're taking care of yourself now." I sat there for a long moment, absorbing her words. A part of me wanted to argue, to say that I wasn't ready to let go of that role, but another part, the quieter part of me, felt something stir, a longing, perhaps, for something more than just caregiving. It was a strange feeling, this pull toward a life that didn't revolve around others. Could I even imagine such a life? That evening, after Lisa and the kids had gone to bed, I sat in the quiet of my small apartment. The space was familiar, comfortable even, but now it felt like a box I had outgrown. For years, I had kept my own dreams at bay, thinking they were selfish, or impractical, or just not possible anymore. But Lisa's words had cracked something open inside me. Maybe it was time to stop living my life only for others. Maybe it was time to consider what I wanted, What I truly wanted. I took a deep breath, grabbed my phone, and impulsively booked a flight to Arizona. Charlotte, my sister, had been encouraging me to visit for months. She had always been the one to push me to take risks, to embrace life with an open heart. I hadn't been able to bring myself to do it, to make a decision for myself, but maybe now was the time. I needed space to think, to figure out what my next chapter looked like. Maybe being with Charlotte in the warmth of the Arizona sun would help me find the clarity I so desperately needed. The flight to Arizona was a blur. As I sat by the window, I thought about my life, about the choices I had made and the ones I had been too afraid to make. What would it look like to take the reins for once? To live for myself, without the constant pull of responsibility? Would it feel like freedom, or would it feel like betrayal? Charlotte was waiting for me at the Phoenix airport, her silver hair glowing in the desert sun, her smile wide and welcoming. She greeted me with a bear hug, and I instantly felt a sense of comfort, of being seen, in a way I hadn't in years. Finally, she teased. Visiting your favorite sister. About time. I laughed, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to loosen. You're my only sister, I reminded her. She waved that away with her usual flair, dismissing anything that got in the way of living life fully. Her home was exactly what I expected. Bright, colorful, and filled with art. It was a stark contrast to my own quiet, modest apartment. The energy was different here, free and creative, filled with possibilities. Charlotte didn't just live, she thrived. She had always been the one to follow her passions, to create, to experiment, to live life on her terms. Come on, let's get you settled, she said, steering me toward the patio with a margarita in hand. Then, we're going to start Operation Eleanor Rediscovery. I raised an eyebrow, but before I could ask, she explained. You've been too busy being everyone else's person for so long. It's time to reconnect with the you underneath all of that. The you that's been waiting for a chance to breathe. Over the next few days, Charlotte had a plan for everything. We took pottery classes, hiked in the desert at sunrise, and attended an outdoor concert where I found myself dancing, something I hadn't done in public in decades. I felt a spark of joy, something unfamiliar but deeply needed. With Charlotte, I wasn't just a mother, a grandmother, a caregiver. I was simply Eleanor. And that felt like a revelation. One night, as we sat on her patio with drinks in hand, Charlotte handed me a gift, a journal with a turquoise leather cover. Write in it, she urged. One page for each option you're considering. Arizona, the job, living with Lisa. Write about what excites you and what scares you. It'll help you figure out what's really right for you. I opened the journal to the first page. The words, what would Eleanor do if she weren't afraid? Staring up at me. It was the simplest question, but it felt like the most important one I'd ever been asked. I had spent so much of my life making decisions out of duty, out of fear of letting others down. What would it be like to choose for myself? To acknowledge what I truly wanted, not just what others needed. As I began to write, I realized the answer was clearer than I expected. I wasn't ready to choose just one path. I could have a life that was varied, complex, and full of meaning. One where I didn't have to sacrifice myself for the sake of others. And so, my journey began. It was a strange feeling to stand at the crossroads of my life and realize that I had choices. Real, tangible choices. For so long, I had felt as though my life had been mapped out for me by responsibilities and expectations. But now, as I sat on Charlotte's patio in the warmth of the Arizona sun, a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. I was no longer just a caretaker. I was Eleanor, a woman with the possibility of a future that was hers to design. Charlotte's plan, or rather, her philosophy, was one of gentle nudges. She didn't push me into anything. Instead, she gave me the space to breathe, to rediscover parts of myself that had long been dormant. We spent the next few days doing things I hadn't done in years, things I had forgotten I even enjoyed. The pottery class was a revelation. The feel of clay between my fingers, the rhythm of the wheel, was like reconnecting with a piece of myself I hadn't known I missed. Remember how you used to talk about getting back into pottery? Charlotte asked one afternoon, as I smoothed the edges of a small bowl. Looks like you're doing it now, without even realizing it. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of calm wash over me. The simplicity of creating something with my hands was grounding, therapeutic. It wasn't just about making beautiful things. It was about reconnecting with my own creativity. The act of creating was as much about healing as it was about art. And as I watched the shapes take form, I realized that this was what I needed to build my life around, a balance between doing for others and doing for myself. I wasn't just going to be the helper anymore. I could be the one who was helped, who nurtured her own spirit. The days spent with Charlotte were a balm for my soul. We hiked in the desert at sunrise, a landscape bathed in golden light, the quiet of the morning echoing a kind of peace I hadn't known I was missing. We talked about everything and nothing, sharing memories from our childhood, laughing over old family stories, and even crying over things we hadn't fully processed until then. Charlotte's house, with its vibrant colors and artistic energy, felt like a sanctuary, a reminder of the power of following one's passions. But it wasn't just about fun and relaxation. As we talked, I realized something profound. Charlotte wasn't just encouraging me to enjoy myself. She was helping me see that I could, at last, prioritize my own desires and needs. For so long, I had given everything to my family, convinced that my role was to be the unwavering support. But in doing so, I had lost touch with the parts of me that made me feel whole. On my last night in Arizona, Charlotte presented me with a gift, a beautiful handmade journal with a turquoise leather cover. It felt symbolic, as though she was passing on a piece of herself to me, a reminder to write my own story now. Start with this question, she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. What would Eleanor do if she weren't afraid? I had barely known how to answer that question. What did I want? What did I truly need? The next morning, after an emotional goodbye with Charlotte, I boarded the plane back to my life in the city. But I wasn't the same woman who had left a few days ago. I had a sense of clarity, of purpose. I knew I needed to make some big decisions. Back home, Lisa reached out immediately. She had heard about the transformation I was going through and was eager to talk. We met for coffee, and I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't in years. She was surprised by my willingness to explore my own path, but she also seemed relieved. It was as if my own self-care was giving her permission to do the same. Over coffee, I explained that I was considering some of the options Charlotte had encouraged me to explore. I mentioned my desire to visit Arizona more often, to have a second home, to work less and spend more time focusing on my own creative pursuits. Lisa listened carefully, her eyes softening. She had always been the one who needed me to be everything, but now she seemed to understand that I needed to be more than just a support system for everyone else. You deserve to have a life that's yours, too, Mom, she said, her voice full of sincerity. We'll figure it out. Whatever you need, I'm here. It was strange hearing her say that. For years, I had carried the weight of their expectations, of Daniel's expectations. But now, there was an openness between us that I hadn't felt in a long time. A recognition that both of us were learning how to put ourselves first, not out of selfishness, but out of necessity. That evening, Lisa shared an idea that felt both familiar and new. Mom, she said, her voice hesitant but hopeful. What if you considered living close to us, but not in the house? You know, like a small apartment or garden house nearby. Something where you could have your own space but still be part of our lives. It was an idea that spoke to me. I had always loved being close to my family, but I also knew that living independently was crucial for me. I needed a space where I could feel like my own person, not just a caregiver. I wasn't ready to let go of my autonomy, but I didn't want to be far from my grandkids either. I smiled, feeling the weight of the past few months lift. I think that might be the perfect solution, Lisa. We spent the next few weeks exploring options. Houses, apartments, places that would allow me to maintain my independence while being close enough to the family to be involved. It was an exciting process, one I hadn't anticipated, but it felt right. I was beginning to design a life that was centered on my needs, rather than just everyone else's. Meanwhile, I also received an unexpected offer from the hospital. Dr. Wilson, who had long been a colleague, presented me with a new position. One that combined my nursing background with my growing interest in art therapy. I was both flattered and overwhelmed by the idea. It felt like an opportunity to finally merge my two worlds, medicine and art, in a way that had always seemed like an impossibility. I knew I had to make a decision, and fast. The possibilities were overwhelming, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to step into a completely new life. But there was something in me, a quiet voice, telling me that now was the time to take that leap. The next few days felt like a whirlwind of decisions and planning, but I was determined to make choices that were in line with my true desires, not just what I thought I should do. I booked a flight to Arizona for a few weeks in the winter, to spend time with Charlotte, to work on my pottery, and to continue reflecting on what my next chapter would look like. It felt like a small but powerful act of self-care, one that would allow me to reconnect with the woman I had put on hold for so long. And as I watched the sun set over the Arizona desert, I realized that I was no longer just living for others. I was living for myself. I was Eleanor, and my story was mine to write. As I returned home to face the decisions ahead, I realized that this was only the beginning. I wasn't just taking steps forward. I was stepping into a life where I could finally be both the caretaker and the creator, both the mother and the woman. It felt like freedom. When I returned home, my heart was full of new possibilities. The warmth of Arizona, the clarity that Charlotte's questions had sparked, and the promise of change felt like a fire that had ignited within me. For so long, I had been consumed by the responsibilities of caring for everyone else. But now, the world seemed full of new horizons. Horizons that I was finally ready to explore for myself. I began taking small steps toward crafting this new version of my life. First, I called Lisa, determined to have a conversation that felt different from any we'd had before. I needed to tell her about my trip to Arizona, about what I was considering for my future, and about the changes I was ready to make. And I needed to hear what she thought. We met at a small cafe, and as soon as I sat down, I could see the curiosity in her eyes. "So, how was your trip?" she asked, her voice light but sincere. "It was exactly what I needed, Lisa. It gave me a chance to reconnect with parts of myself I didn't even know I'd lost." Her eyes softened, and I could tell she was processing the shift in me. "That's good to hear," she said quietly, taking a sip of her coffee. "I've been thinking a lot, too, about the way things have been between us, and how much I rely on you. You've always been the one holding everything together. I just never realized how much that cost you." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. It wasn't that I wanted to be resentful or bitter. It was just that, for so long, I had given everything to my family without realizing that I was losing myself in the process. But hearing her acknowledge it meant something. It meant we were finally breaking through old patterns. "I've been thinking about what I want too," Lisa continued, her voice now more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. "I want to be a better mother to my kids. I want to be the kind of mom who can have time for herself without feeling guilty. And I think you've been teaching me that." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Lisa had always been so independent, so driven. But now, she was asking for permission to be imperfect, just like I was learning to do. I smiled softly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Lisa, I don't want you to feel like you have to be everything for everyone. You don't have to do it all. You can take time for yourself, too." We sat there for a while, sipping our coffee in companionable silence. It felt like we were on the cusp of something new, something both freeing and vulnerable. A shift in our relationship was happening, a deeper understanding of each other that went beyond roles and expectations. As I left the cafe, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I knew that my life was no longer solely about fulfilling the needs of others. I was going to honor myself, my desires, and my creative pursuits. But the path wasn't going to be easy. There were still moments of doubt, of fear, of guilt. The familiar weight of obligations still loomed at times, but I was learning how to put them down when they became too heavy. Soon after that conversation with Lisa, I began the next phase of my journey. The art therapy position. Dr. Wilson had been incredibly supportive, offering me a role that would allow me to balance my passion for nursing with my growing interest in pottery. The opportunity felt like the perfect intersection of my two worlds, healthcare and art, and I was excited, though also nervous, to step into it. I was offered a flexible schedule that would allow me to travel to Arizona during the winters, something that was non-negotiable for me. I needed that time with Charlotte, that time to recharge and rediscover my own rhythms. And, of course, the idea of working with the hospital's community outreach programs, helping patients heal through creativity, felt deeply fulfilling. It was a chance to integrate the lessons I had learned into something meaningful, something that would touch others' lives. When I returned home from my trip, Daniel and Lisa were there, waiting with open arms. They were supportive, but there was a subtle shift in our dynamic. It wasn't just about what I could give anymore. It was about creating a new kind of relationship, one where my needs mattered as much as theirs. A few days later, Lisa showed up at my apartment with a folder in hand. It was a collection of small garden houses, properties within walking distance of their home. I was touched by the gesture, but I didn't need to make any decisions right away. I needed space. I needed to be in control of this next step, not rushed or pushed by anyone, no matter how well-meaning. "I'm still not sure what my next move will be," I told her, leafing through the folder slowly. "But I'm grateful for you helping me explore options. This is the kind of support I need." Lisa nodded, her eyes warm. "Whatever you decide, I want you to be happy, Mom. I think I finally get that it's okay to want that for yourself." As the days turned into weeks, I began to settle into the new rhythms of my life. The balance between work, family, and personal time wasn't always easy to maintain, but I was getting better at it. I spent more time at the pottery wheel, working on pieces that felt more authentic, more connected to who I was becoming. Each creation was a reflection of my growth, a symbol of my newfound freedom to be both the caregiver and the creator. One evening, Lisa and I sat together in my apartment, chatting about the kids and their latest adventures. Adam had won another chess tournament, and Sophia was thriving in her middle school art classes. My heart swelled with pride, not just for them, but for the new place I had carved out for myself in their lives. "I think I'm ready," I told Lisa as I sipped my tea. "Ready to find my own place. Close by, but with space to breathe, to create." She smiled, her expression full of understanding. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said quietly. "I think you're finally living for yourself, and that makes all the difference." I smiled back, feeling the truth of her words settle deep within me. For so many years, I had been the one who always put others first, who tried to meet every need and expectation. But now, I was learning to prioritize my own joy, my own fulfillment. And as I did, I realized that I was giving my family something even more valuable than my sacrifices. I was giving them the gift of seeing me fully alive, fully engaged in my own life. The weeks passed in a blur of decisions and reflections. My new job at the hospital was both challenging and rewarding, and I found joy in watching patients tap into their own creative potential. The community outreach program blossomed, and I found that my nursing background, combined with my love of art, was exactly what people needed. Lisa's family began to understand my boundaries in a way they hadn't before. I wasn't disappearing into their needs anymore. Instead, I was there when I could be, but also present in my own life. The holidays arrived, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was stepping into the season with peace rather than exhaustion. When Thanksgiving came around, I didn't feel the sharp sting of exclusion from Lisa's family. Instead, I was finally at peace with my own choices. I no longer had to prove my worth through sacrifice. I had learned that my worth was intrinsic, rooted in who I was, not in what I could give. The road ahead was still uncertain in many ways, but it was also filled with new opportunities. Opportunities to explore my creativity, my relationships, and the person I had become. And I knew, for the first time in a long time, that I was on the right path. As the new year unfolded, the changes in my life began to feel less like moments of personal revolution and more like the natural unfolding of a journey that had been waiting for me all along. The shift within me was palpable, even if subtle, and I could feel my body, mind, and soul starting to sync with the rhythm of this new chapter. It was a strange feeling, this balance between excitement and uncertainty. But it was the kind of uncertainty that didn't feel scary anymore. It felt freeing. I was learning to live with ambiguity and trust that things would unfold as they should, as long as I stayed true to myself. One of the first things I did in January was officially sign up for pottery classes in my neighborhood. I had always dreamed of returning to pottery, but it had always seemed like one of those far-off ambitions that I never quite made time for. That changed now. I was determined to give myself the gift of creativity, just for the sake of it. I signed up for a weekly class, promising myself I would stick with it. The first few sessions were a mix of exhilaration and frustration. I'd forgotten how challenging it was to work with clay, how it sometimes slipped through your fingers, uncooperative and unpredictable. But there was a kind of magic in those moments of struggle, the feeling of connecting with something deeply physical, something that required full attention. It reminded me of what Charlotte had taught me, that creation itself was a form of self-care. The messiness of life could be transformed into something meaningful, just as the mess of wet clay could be molded into beautiful art. At the same time, my new role with the hospital's community outreach program was beginning to take shape. The art therapy program was flourishing, and my role as its leader was evolving. It wasn't easy. At first, I felt out of my depth, unsure of how to manage the delicate balance between the clinical and artistic elements of the program. But little by little, I found my footing, discovering that my experience as a nurse gave me a unique perspective. I understood the emotional and physical toll illness took on patients and their families. It was the kind of understanding that allowed me to lead with empathy and sensitivity. I began to see the impact of our work. One afternoon, I sat with a young woman, Lizzie, who had been battling cancer for over a year. She was one of our first participants, and she had started making simple clay pieces as a way of expressing her journey. At first, she only made abstract shapes, unsure of what she was trying to say. But after weeks of working with the clay, she began to make forms that represented parts of her life, things she missed, things she wanted to regain, and things she feared. One of the last pieces she made before her treatment ended was a small bowl with jagged edges, each crack filled with gold. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. It was a symbol of strength, of healing through imperfection, of accepting the flaws and the scars that come with living. As I watched her carefully place it on the shelf, tears filled my eyes. This was why I was doing this work. Not for recognition, not for accolades, but to help people reclaim their stories and find meaning in the process of healing. When I wasn't working, I was at home, enjoying the newfound freedom of my own space. I had moved into a small garden apartment, just a few miles from Lisa's house. It wasn't much, a cozy one-bedroom with a small patio and a tiny kitchen, but it was mine. The solitude I had once feared was now a sanctuary. It was a place to breathe, to reflect, and to create. Every day, I worked at the pottery wheel, experimenting with new techniques, refining my skills. Sometimes, the process felt meditative. Other times, it felt frustrating. But it was always mine, in a way that nothing else had been in years. I took walks around the neighborhood, stopping to admire the flowers in people's gardens, the towering trees, the unexpected bits of beauty that I'd once missed in the rush of life. I began to recognize the rhythms of the seasons in my own life, the days when I felt more energized, the days when I needed to slow down. One afternoon, Lisa came over to visit, her arms full of grocery bags. She had called earlier in the day to check in on me, and I had invited her to come by. "Hi, Mom," she called, kicking the door closed behind her. "How's the pottery going?" I smiled, feeling the joy that came from sharing this new part of my life with her. "It's going well. I'm working on a few pieces for the community center exhibition next month." Her eyes sparkled. "That's great. I can't wait to see them. You know, the kids ask about you all the time. They miss you." "I miss them too," I said, smiling. "But I've been so focused on my own work that I'm afraid I've neglected my grandmother duties." She laughed, setting the bags down on the counter. "I get it. And honestly, I admire that you're finally taking care of yourself. I think we're all learning how to do that." We spent the afternoon together, chatting about everything and nothing. As the sun dipped low in the sky, I found myself reflecting on how much our relationship had changed over the past few months. I no longer felt like the only one carrying the weight of the world. Lisa was learning to ask for help, to lean on others, and to accept her own limitations. "I've been thinking," she said as we sat down to tea. "Maybe I should slow down a bit. Not try to do everything. You know, take a step back." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. What brought this on? She sighed, taking a long sip of tea. "I've been running on empty for so long. I think I've been trying to prove something to myself. But maybe it's time to redefine what success looks like." I nodded, grateful for this new openness between us. It's hard, isn't it? The balancing act between what you think you should do and what you really want to do. Exactly, Lisa agreed. I've been so focused on what others expect from me. But maybe it's time I started listening to what I expect from myself. As we continued to talk, I realized how much we had both grown. We were no longer locked in a cycle of obligation and expectation. There was more space between us now, space where we could each be who we were, without judgment, without guilt. The phone rang, and I glanced at the caller ID. It was Dr. Wilson from the hospital. I answered, excusing myself for a moment. "Eleanor," he said with his usual warmth, "I wanted to talk to you about something exciting. The program's success has been incredible, and we've had some interest from other hospitals in replicating what you've built. I'd like you to come in next week to discuss expanding the program on a national level." I felt my pulse quicken. The possibilities were thrilling, but also intimidating. National. I had only just begun to feel comfortable in my own skin, let alone stepping onto such a big stage. "That sounds incredible," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I'm not sure if I'm ready for that kind of responsibility." "I think you'll be surprised," Dr. Wilson said. "You've already proven that you can handle it. You're the heart of this program, and we think you're ready for the next step." I sat back, a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions swirling through me. This could be the opportunity of a lifetime, but it would also require stepping out of my comfort zone in a big way. For the first time in a long while, I realized that I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid to say yes to what felt right. I wasn't afraid to take risks, to explore new horizons, and to embrace the changes that life was offering me. When I returned to Lisa, her eyes were full of curiosity. "Who was that?" "Dr. Wilson," I replied, my voice still carrying the excitement. "They want to expand the program, nationally." Her eyes widened. "Wow, that's incredible, Mom." "I'm still processing it," I said. "But I think I'm ready to take the leap." Lisa smiled, her expression full of pride. "I knew you were capable of this. You've already done the hardest part. You've built something meaningful. Now, you get to share it with the world." As I walked back to my pottery wheel later that evening, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose settling in. This journey was mine to shape, just like the clay I worked with every day. Imperfect, yes, but beautiful in its own right. And for the first time, I felt truly ready to embrace whatever came next. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about becoming. And that was more than enough. As the months passed, the ripples of the choices I had made started to settle into a life that was beginning to feel balanced in a way it never had before. The art therapy program at the hospital continued to thrive, and I had started to carve out a space in my life that wasn't centered around giving everything to others. There was room for me now. Room to be, to create, to explore. That freedom was strange at first, like an unfamiliar garment that didn't quite fit. But as I wore it more, I began to feel its contours and understand how to move within it. The pottery had become a way for me to process the changes, to find expression in a medium I had loved for years but had left behind. It wasn't just about the art itself. It was the act of creating that gave me permission to feel my own worth, to reconnect with myself in a way I had lost touch with for so long. When my fingers met the cool, wet clay, I felt grounded, centered. For the first time in my life, I was working for me, not for anyone else. It wasn't just the art that had shifted. My relationship with Lisa had blossomed in ways I hadn't anticipated. After our conversation about boundaries and my decision to take time for myself, there was a space between us that allowed for deeper, more honest conversations. We didn't need to rush through our talks anymore, each of us trying to outdo the other with the stories of our busy lives. There was quiet understanding in our exchanges now. I was still spending time with my grandchildren, but it was different. There was no longer the underlying current of obligation, the feeling that I had to be their everything. Now, I was simply their grandmother, present, but with a life of my own. And in that, I felt something change. The pressure that had once weighed on me to be the perfect grandmother, the perfect mother, began to lift. I could be myself, unapologetically, and still be there for them when they needed me. My apartment became my sanctuary, a cozy one-bedroom with a small garden in the back that I had begun to cultivate. My mornings started with a cup of tea, sitting in the garden, watching the birds flutter from tree to tree. I had never realized how much I needed that silence, that space to just be. The act of tending to my little garden became a metaphor for tending to myself, nurturing, patient, quiet. Each day, something new bloomed, something small and significant. But the change that perhaps had the most profound effect on me happened when I finally decided to accept Dr. Wilson's offer to expand the art therapy program nationally. It was a leap I wasn't entirely sure I was ready for, but I had already proven to myself that I could step out of my comfort zone. The thought of taking on such a large responsibility made my stomach twist with uncertainty. Could I really balance this with my newfound independence? Could I manage a national project and still stay true to the balance I had worked so hard to create in my personal life? But then, I thought of the pottery I had been making. Each piece had started as a small, imperfect lump of clay, and through time and effort, it had slowly, carefully, become something of value. If I could trust that process in my art, why couldn't I trust it in my life? So, I agreed to lead the national expansion, but on my own terms. I would continue to work with my local community, running the program at the hospital, while also overseeing the new projects. I would keep my winters free for time in Arizona with Charlotte, a life I had come to cherish, and maintain the boundaries I had fought so hard to set. This way, I could contribute to something bigger while also honoring my own needs. The decision felt right. It was a delicate balance, but one I was learning to navigate. As the days stretched into weeks, I found myself more attuned to the rhythm of my life. In my pottery class, I noticed a shift in myself, not just in the way I shaped the clay, but in the way I shaped my own story. I no longer felt the weight of others' expectations looming over me. I was allowed to be a beginner, to learn, to make mistakes. There was a quiet joy in that. No longer did I need to be the perfect caregiver, the perfect professional, or the perfect family member. I could simply be myself. Someone still growing, still discovering. It was around this time that Lisa and I had another conversation, one that surprised both of us. We were sitting in my apartment, sipping tea, when she suddenly spoke. "I've been thinking about your advice," she said, looking up from her cup. "About slowing down, about choosing what really matters. I'm actually thinking of going part-time at the firm. Just for a year or two." The words felt like a gentle mirror of my own decisions. Lisa, too, was learning the power of choice, the importance of stepping back, and giving herself the same grace she gave to everyone else. "Are you sure?" I asked, leaning forward. "I know it's a big step." "I think it's the right step," she said, her voice steady. "I've been juggling so many things for so long, trying to keep everyone happy. I want to be there for the kids more, be more present in our home. And I've realized I don't have to do everything to prove my worth." I smiled, a sense of pride swelling in my chest. "I'm proud of you. It's not an easy choice, but it's a good one." We sat in silence for a moment, letting the magnitude of our respective choices settle around us. Then, as if to solidify the moment, Lisa stood and pulled me into a hug. "Thanks, Mom, for teaching me that it's okay to put yourself first sometimes." I squeezed her back, feeling a profound shift between us. Our relationship had deepened in a way I had never thought possible. And in that hug, I realized just how much we had both grown. We were no longer locked in a dynamic of giving and giving without ever receiving. We were learning to give and receive, both to each other and to ourselves. Later that week, I sat down with my journal again, reflecting on everything that had happened in the past year. It was hard to believe how much had changed, how much I had changed. The woman who had once been caught in the web of everyone else's needs was now reclaiming her own identity, her own space, and her own voice. The life I had once lived had been filled with sacrifice, yes, but it had also been filled with love. And now, I was learning to balance both. To love and give, but not at the expense of myself. It was a delicate dance, one that I had to keep tuning, like the pottery on my wheel. Imperfect, but beautiful. And just like the clay, I was still growing.